Hey everyone, it's Peter Kirk from Rock Daydream Nation, and I've got two esteemed panelists back to the channel. Reed Little from the Contrarians. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, Peter. Thank you for the invite. I cannot wait to tuck into this catalog.
Absolutely. And Pete Jones. Wonderful to have you back, mate. How you going?
Nice to see both of you. Honored and pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. We are going to do the catalogue of the band Dio, and we are going to do best song, worst song, each album. And when I say worst song, probably our least favorite song. So it doesn't mean it, the song stinks. It just means that it's our least favorite. This is going to be a tough one. And I signed the two gentlemen on this panel to go right back to the start with Holy Diver, and we are going to go right to the end. Reed Little, we are going to start off with Holy Diver from 1983. This is the album that went double platinum in America. It was the one that created the whole mystique about the band Dio. Reed, best song, least favorite song, Dio, Holy Diver. Let's get going.
Right. So you and I were once talking about a completely different artist, and you said, I've been preparing for this panel my whole life. Well, Dio is the panel for which I've been preparing my whole life. So I listened to this catalog every year, start to finish, regardless. So this was just changed the timing a little bit. Holy Diver, I'll just say up front, is my favorite Dio album. It's always, well, actually not always. In 1984, I liked Last in Line better for a few months. But Holy Diver is my favorite. I think it's the album that Black Sabbath would have put out if Dio had not left Black Sabbath. It's a very Mob Rules kind of songwriting on it. And because it's one of the more well-known albums, I'm not going to say as much on it. I'll save my my longer words for the less well-known albums as we go along. So the hard part on this is picking a favorite and least favorite, because I don't have a least favorite song. I love every track on this album, full stop. It's 10 out of 10. I could just throw darts at it and say, that's my favorite, that's my least favorite. It's like doing a Rorschach ink blot. It's a personality test. So this week, listening to it, Don't Talk to Strangers was my favorite track. Mm-hmm. I love a menacing Dio track. I love the weird lyrics on it. Don't smell the flowers. They're an evil drug to make you lose your mind. His singing is just, he's still very much in that Black Sabbath mode. So he's delivering those real aggressive, real kind of mystical lyrics. Vivian is full of piss and vinegar and just eager to show the world what he can do. And he turns in a killer solo on everything. And on this album, he was also playing riffs, which he kind of gives up on later. So yes, Don't Talk to Strangers right now is my favorite. Hasn't always been my favorite. Might not even be next week. Picking a least favorite was almost impossible. I literally was going, there has to be something about one of these songs that I don't like. And I eventually decided that Invisible is my least favorite, just because I don't like the way Dio sings between a lady and a man. So valid. That's it. That 2 seconds of lyric is why it's my least favorite song. Other than that, I love everything on this album. It's one of those desert island albums. If I could take 5 albums with me for the rest of my life, this would be one of them.
Well done, Reed. And nitpicking, not really. That's like that. Pete Jones.
Excellent. Well, I'm also like Reed. This is something that has never ever left, my lexicon. This is something I listen to constantly. And, from that standpoint, these are refreshers. Long history with all these. I got all of these in real time. So, it's been quite a few decades. And I remember the time I heard it all the way through was the weekend before it was released, WMMS in Cleveland. My folks had moved to Ohio and I was in Illinois. So I had gotten out of college and was just finally relaxing after a very long year at school. And they played Holy Diver straight through. And I went out and got it the day it was released. It was like, okay, this works. My favorite track on this has always been Stand Up and Shout. the opener. To me, this is just epic Dio. It carries over from, Sabbath, and also his, kind of semi-influence from the Deep Purple era, to do something fast, aggressive, strong to open the album. It just makes a huge statement. Vivian's opening guitar riff is just crushing. And as the drummer, oh my God, as soon as Vinny comes in, it's like I'm so excited because he's really playing the way he wants to play now, and it's just menacing. Ronnie never sounded better. I think it's the most up tempo and aggressive track on the record, and I just really think it's just perfection from top to bottom. And it just really kind of throws the gauntlet down right off the bat and says, if you think there's a fall off, guess again. No, not happening. My least favorite, we always go with our hearts. My least favorite's Rainbow in the Dark. And it didn't start that way, so I will make that clear. It just hasn't aged as well for me. I'm sure there is hand to heart a bit of fatigue on it as well. But I think in comparison to all the other tracks, it is the least heavy, the least aggressive. I don't want to say poppy because I don't think it's poppy. I think that would be a misrepresentation. I'm not a big fan of the keyboard part. The band is solid. Ronnie sounds amazing, but it is a song I do skip a lot of times now when I'm listening to it, even on the zillion live bootlegs I've got. I'll skip Rainbow in the Dark, but Stand Up and Shout is my favorite, and my least favorite would be Rainbow in the Dark.
Thanks, Pete. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
Mine is Holy Diver. And I think Dio's got a knack with self-titled songs being absolute bangers. And just a little bit of trivia, there was an insurance commercial in Australia, and they had Holy Diver as the theme song. So it's actually made jingles in Australia. It's an iconic song. And I just think Dio's vocal lines on this song are just so rousing, anthemic, melodic. It's catchy, it's memorable. And I just love the way his wordplay on this song is just delightful. And his inflections, like ride the tiger. It's just full of drama. I think it's a wonderful song. My God, they found a guitar hero, didn't they, in Vivian Campbell? He's an absolute star on this album. Those albums that he did with Dio, his guitar lines were so tasteful, memorable, and it was decidedly unorthodox. It was a style of guitar that you'd never heard before. You listen to a lead break of Vivian Campbell and you think it's going to go in this direction, but it goes right or left. And that's what I like. He's adventurous. And I think a lot of people just miss that with Vivian's later work. But we'll talk about that over the course of the show. But he found a star. The band's on fire. Jimmy Bain on the bass, bubbling away. And Vinny Appice, Pete, he's just in the pocket. It's perfect. It's a... Rainbow in the Dark is my least favorite. I'm like you. It's the keyboard. I think that's dating it. That's if you did a carbon dating on this song and you didn't know what year it came from, you'd hear it and go, oh, yeah, that's 1983. But it sort of resonated with a lot of folk. And that was the cut through that propelled the album to a lot of people via radio and sold a lot of units. It's a bit of a mystery. I don't think it's the strongest song, but there's something that did resonate with this particular song. And Ronnie didn't like it. Basically other members of the band, I think it was Jimmy Bain who did the keyboard line and presented it to Ronnie, and he really had to be cajoled to lay the track. And it's just one of those things that it had a whole life of its own. So any show that Ronnie's done, that's always kind of sort of rusted on. It's like there's smoke on the water as being a rusted on song. But Rainbow in the Dark to me has never been something that I've gravitated to. I'm like you, Pete. I just think there's a lot more stronger songs on this album. Anyway.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
both
sure.
of you? In hindsight, with our retrospective eyes, considering that there was probably strong budgetary considerations. Do you think the two videos helped these tracks, or just having something accessible?
I think any video helps, because that was in the era of 1983 where MTV would gobble up anything. So just to get a video out on MTV
Right.
definitely would have assisted with cut through, no matter if the video was or down.
Okay.
You know, you say that, and yet, as I've said many times, and I'm actually going to bring up MTV in our very next album here, but as an obsessive MTV watcher, I mean, I would get home from school. I was 13 when MTV hit TV. I was 15 when this album came out. I would get home from school, sit down in front of the TV and turn MTV on, and it would run until I went to bed or my parents kicked me out so they could watch TV. And yet, I never saw one of those first two videos.
Wow.
The first video of Dio's I ever saw was for Last in Line.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, it may have been played on the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, because they had different sort of periods where there was the high rotation period and the medium. Look, I'm sure it got played, but it probably might have been in another time slot read.
No doubt. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Pete, what's your take about the videos?
Yeah, you know, I think of Holy Diver, and I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. The graphics aren't great. Is the story really make sense? But of course, a lot of videos really kind of didn't make sense. You know, Rainbow in the Dark was kind of that, you know, weird kind of pervy guy creeping around, you know, and you're like, and, you know, Vivian's in the stairwell and he comes out and scares them. And, you know, I'm like, okay. I mean, like I said, I'm sure they didn't have a lot of budget, you know, to do that kind of thing. And as Reed says, you know, when you get to Last in Line, things improve on the video market pretty strongly. But the songs were strong enough that, you know, I think, you know, they were able, anything you could hear and go, oh, it's Dio, it's Dio. You were kind of just forgiving whatever it was. I mean, so they're not great videos, but you remember them, I guess, and I guess that serves its purpose.
Absolutely. And one more thing before we move on to the next album. Do we all agree that the album cover actually rules? That basically sold a lot of copies, and probably at face value, a lot of young folk, you know, being rebellious or into rock and not knowing anything about Dio and seeing that album cover and going, oh, okay.
Well, I think my quick 2 cents on that is that, you know, Ronnie is built on contradictions. Everything is to make you think one way or the other. Is it the heads or the tails of the coin? There's always one or the other. And, you know, I loved one of the very first interviews I heard, and people were saying, oh, you know, that album cover's pretty controversial. And he's like, why? Well, you've got, you know, a monster throwing a religious figure. And he goes, how do you know that's not a religious figure throwing a monster in the water? And I was like,
Over time, a lot of vindication on what Ronnie was saying.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll leave it there. All right, we go to the second album, Last in Line from 1984, and commercially it did even better from a chart placing, number 23 in the US charts and number 4 in the UK charts, 1 platinum. So it's definitely a swell of momentum. Reed, what's your favorite and least favorite song of The Last in Line?
Right. So I have to completely agree with you on something up to a point, because we're going to reach the point where that stops being true. Dio had a knack for picking the best tracks to go on his albums. And now he had been structuring his album, sequencing the songs the same way since Rising. So you have the fast opening track, then you have the kind of majestic, mystical track. You're going to have the long, epic track. He liked songs about runaways and whatnot. But Last in Line is an amazing song. It's not just my favorite song on this album. It's not just one of my favorite Dio songs. It's one of my favorite songs, period, full stop, across the board. I first heard it when I saw the video on MTV. The video is amazing. I just watched it earlier this week for a panel I was doing on videos on another channel. And I think it still holds up. It's got an amazing concept. And considering that they weren't spending millions of dollars on these, it looks fantastic. It's got these guys that look like the Borg 7 years before the Borg were a thing for Star Trek. You've got Ronnie saving a kid by stabbing a demon in the nuts with a tube that's supposed to look kind of like a lightsaber. What else could you possibly want? It's an amazing video. The only thing I don't like is that it actually chops about a minute off of the song.
Right.
Including a big piece of Vivian's solo, which is one of the best guitar solos ever. And it's always very interesting to me. People always say, well, if you like someone, you should see where they came from. Go listen to their guitar heroes and blah, blah, blah. And Viv's always talking about Gary Moore. Not Moore, mind you, it's Moore. And Viv doesn't play anything like Gary Moore. Except for Gary does these 3-note arpeggios, these very fast 3-note arpeggios that Viv picked up from him. But other than that, his style of blending really fast, short runs and then long melodic passages gives you that hit of, oh, that's impressive because of his speed and dexterity, but it's the melody of it that you remember. Da, 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 da. That sticks with you. So in my mind, that is the perfect solo, and it really established how I think guitar solos should be. George Lynch was another one that kind of did solos in that vein. But Last in Line, it's been one of my favorite songs. I've told this story before, but I just think it's hilarious. I was so into this song that when I got this tape, I listened to it, I don't know how many times. I mean, I listened to that one song over and over and over and over. And finally, somebody asked me what I thought of the rest of the album, and I was like, I don't know, I've never listened to it. So I actually had to force myself to listen to the rest of the album. And I was like, oh, it's good. But still, Last in Line will always be my favorite track on this album. Now, as far as least favorite, this is where we get into my least favorite thing about the Dio band is Ronnie always said it was a result of the other guys wanting to take their shot at getting airplay, but every album has at least one of these radio-friendly songs. And Dio would do interviews where he would say, anybody can write a top 40 hit, that's easy. Well, clearly that's not the case, Ronnie. And I think Mystery is the weakest song on the album. I remember at the time him doing interviews where he was talking about, yeah, I didn't really want to do it, but the other guys did. And, I'm not a dictator. This is a real band. So it was a band situation. And I was like, yeah, and yet you're out bad-mouthing it on MTV, which is not a good look. And I don't know if that kind of poisoned me against the song, but I always thought it was the weakest track. Also, in 1984, it was, Heavy Metal or Die. And this song is clearly just not metal. It's much more, I don't know. I'd say it's even lighter than Rainbow for the most part, but it's my least favorite track on the album.
Okay, Reed, thanks for that. Pete, what's your least favorite, or what's your favorite and least favorite?
Wonderful. I will say this is my favorite Dio studio record. Picking a favorite on this is very challenging. I've got easily 3 or 4 contenders that battle it out on an absolute regular basis. So after careful consideration, I have decided to go with One Night in the City. I just absolutely think this is the perfect kind of medium tempo, powerful riff, thundering drums, huge vocals from Ronnie, great driving bass from Jimmy. It's melodic. I love the bridge. There's just ridiculous drum fills all through this. I think Vivian's guitar solo on here is spectacular. And the entire track just feels good. So I can't go wrong with all of those elements. And it's just kind of got a energy and a something just makes you kind of just go, you know, which is a good feeling when you're listening to something hard and heavy and loud. So that's a good indicator. So One Night in the City. My least favorite on this is Breathless. The reason I've picked that one is that Ronnie occasionally was very guilty of, I don't want to say over singing because he was such a great singer, but it showed up a lot in the first parts of the Heaven and Hell era where he got very growly and kind of that way. And that's not really the tonality that I like so much. So I feel like this one's just not really as strong as the other moments on there. It's not my favorite riff, and I think if any of the melodies suffer a bit, this one is maybe not as strong a melody. So it would be One Night in the City for my favorite and Breathless for my least favorite on the last in line.
Nice, Pete. Just a quick question for you. With the reference to Ronnie being a little bit growly in the Heaven and Hell era, do you think it was because he was doing a lot of Black Sabbath songs, the Aussie, and that was his approach, his lane way to attack those songs, to do it like in a growly
I think one of the really great examples is, sometimes bands can get rewarded and or punished for live things that stay out there for posterity. There are a lot of elements in the Black and Blue show where I think Ronnie is way over aggressive and growly. His verses, even in Heaven and Hell, are just he's like that and as soon as he backs off just a touch and does and you're like, there it is, and the voice just explodes. It's open and clean, and you're like, sing like that. And he moving forward, he did much less of that, but maybe there is a sense where he has to be doomy, or edgy enough. His vocals were strong enough. He didn't need to do that. The material that he does on Live Evil from the Ozzy era just crushes, so I've never felt that he wasn't capable. It was just a choice at the time, and it was kind of a small little era that I'm not that big of a fan of.
Yeah, fair enough. Last in Line, again, title track for the album. It's my favorite song, probably my favorite Dio song. In high school, I was like you, Reed. I was obsessed by that song, played it again and again and again. I think We Rock and Last in Line are my favorite, one of my favorite 1-2 opening punch tracks in any heavy metal album. I think it's absolutely sensational. So We Rock, if we had maybe a competition, what's the second favorite, I would probably say that. But Last in Line, I just love that serene, calm vocals at the start. And then he just sings from the gut and it just roars. There's a lot of from the gut singing, isn't there, Pete, in this album, where it's just deep within and it just comes out. Wonderful, unorthodox guitar lead break from Vivian Campbell. Again, this is another example of where the legend of Vivian Campbell resides. I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful piece. It's got a lot of build up, and yeah, I think it's one of the very best Dio songs. I've chosen Egypt, The Chains Are On, as being my least favorite because I think it's just probably over familiarity. This is another Egypto chord, Eastern mysticism type of song, which Ronnie's done previously with Rainbow. So maybe it being overly familiar, it's my least favorite. And Reed, side 2, I didn't really play it that much either. I was obsessed with side 1. I never flipped over the album. It's like moving pictures and Rush. Just side 1, never flipped it over. Same with Dio, Last in Line. I just was obsessed by that first side. So, all right. Sacred Heart, 1985. So UK, number 4. US, number 29. Gold, bit of a dip in sales, but still, a bit of a concert draw card in 1985. Reed, over to you. Favorite song and least favorite song?
Okay. I remember getting this album when it came out. We were actually on a family road trip vacation. And it's funny the things you remember. I remember it was the first cassette I ever bought that was clear plastic. You know, cassettes were this kind of beige plastic that you couldn't see the tape inside, but this one was clear. And I thought, oh, well, that's neat. So we were on a road trip. You know, if I wasn't listening to music, I had to talk to my family. I think every teenager can relate to that. So I listened to it a lot and I really enjoyed it. And I was shocked when I got back home and my friends were like, it's crap, we're off the Dio bandwagon. And I was like, whoa, that's really something. And it was. They were done with that. And over the years, this has really slipped down in my personal Dio rankings. Some of that is there's so much unrealized ambition on this. Dio used to talk about, I remember the interviews where he said they were going to make a computer game and there were clues to treasure in the lyrics of the songs. It never happened. And he wanted to make a movie with talking dragons and it never happened, and all sorts of crazy stuff. He did eventually, of course, have the dragon for the stage show. So he didn't abandon the dragons entirely. But this is an album where I actually like side 2 considerably better than side 1. I think this album is a simplified version of Dio. The riffs are simpler. The drum beats are simpler. If you listen to the first 2 albums, one of the things that really distinguishes Dio is that Vinny and Vivian are both part of the main riff of the song. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a picked guitar note and what's Vinny, like riding the cymbals. That's no longer the case on this album. It took me a long time to figure that out. And I don't know why he put all of my favorite songs on side 2, which is where you usually put the less favorable songs. So I don't know what that says. But my favorite is Like the Beat of a Heart. I think it's one of the few songs that would have fit well on Last in Line. It's very aggressive. It's very menacing. I love the section that's just, I don't know what you call this in musical terms, but just before the guitar solo kicks in, where you've got Vinny solo on the drums, do-do, 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 in a heartbeat, getting lower, and then da-da-da, and it kicks in with the guitar solo, and the guitar solo is great. It doesn't really have the best lyrics. Sometimes I love Dio's lyrics, and sometimes he's a little bit too blunt force with the rhymes. And this is a song where I think his rhymes are a little too on the nose. But nonetheless, it has some menace. It still has some Sabbath in it. And it is my favorite track on the album. Now, anybody paying attention to my least favorite track on Last in Line, and bless you for watching the video, my least favorite track on this song is Hungry for Heaven. But unlike Mystery, which I just think is the weakest song on the album, I think Hungry for Heaven is crap. I thought it was crap the first time I heard it. I thought it was crap this time. I thought it was crap every time I ever listened to it. It starts at the very beginning with that stupid out of tune choir. Ah! Oh! And I'm like, who? That it's so in your face. It had to be a deliberate choice. And I don't understand why you would start a song with something that's literally just nails on a chalkboard for anybody who can hear something that's out of tune, which is the vast majority of people who enjoy listening to music. That made me hate it. He never gets it back. And they said Dio was always trying to put one of these anybody can write a top 40 hit songs on the album. They only work in one case, which we might get to way later in the catalog. But I hate Hungry for Heaven. I hate it when it came out. It was in a wrestling movie or something, too.
Vision Quest.
Vision Quest, yeah. So anyway, I think it was a total misstep on all levels, and it's the first Dio song that I ever went, oh, Ronnie, you have failed me.
Bit harsh, maybe. Pete Jones.
All right. You know, this is an interesting record because it clearly is a different feel, a different direction, and evokes a whole set of different emotions than the first 2 did. The first 2 seem more mature, more focused, polished. concise. This one seemed to drift a bit. And it seems like you don't want to use the word that they were maybe leftovers or outtakes. You don't know that. You don't know the writing process, where they were at. But as a whole, I think the songwriting is a small step down, a small flight of stairs. But there are some really good moments on here, and I think it's a challenging mix as well. It's not nearly as clean as the previous records, and especially Last in Line. It's not as clean as that. But the one thing that does stand out like crazy is that Vinny's drums are enormous. And he has this gorgeous, what I call this perfect blend. And I've said it on other channels talking about drums. It is that perfect high-end crack of the snare drum followed by this beautiful cannon-like explosion in his bass drum. And the wider that gap is, the better it sounds for me sonically, because it just is punch counter punch, and it just makes the tracks feel absolutely huge. So from that standpoint, there's glorious moments of Vinny Appice all over this. But the favorite track on here has never wavered for me, although I have a couple real quick honorables that are kind of below it. But it's King of Rock and Roll. And for me, first of all, Vinny's opening drum riff is just wickedly cool, you know, and a guy who doesn't play double bass, he's just got a thunderously fast right foot, and it just goes off into just pure propulsion. And this is old school, like the first two records. This is the one song that I could see easily anywhere on the other two. It's pounding, it's aggressive. The riff from Vivian is just, it is so good. Ronnie is soaring over the top of this. It is just effortless, and it is so intense. And he's biting off his consonants like he does when he's in those modes. Fast. One, you know, and I love how that sounds. It just cuts like a laser. It's one of my all-time favorite Dio tracks, and I just think it's crushingly good. And live, it was even better. My least favorite is the title track. And the reason is that I think compositionally, this takes that riff, da-da, 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 and it just repeats it over and over and over to the point you just want to put a screwdriver into your ear. And live, of course, when you can't see the visuals that it accompanied it, it just goes on forever and ad nauseum. And that has definitely tarnished this track for me. The lyrics to me, I mean, they're very, you know, dragony, demony, wizardy. But that can be a good thing if it's done well, or it can be kind of a detriment if it's maybe more on the little cheese side. And I think this one's sporting a little cheese. It just didn't work for me. I do have to give quick honorables to a couple tracks. Another Lie, I think, is just monstrously huge. And maybe my favorite drumming is on Just Another Day, where Vinny is just putting on a clinic. So King of Rock and Roll, and my least favorite is Sacred Heart.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah.
I think there were some warning signs on this album. This is where a lot of the songs had that sort of what I call a Dio dinosaur plod. They kind of plod around, and they sound like a dinosaur just stomping around. And that's kind of tainted a lot of the albums for me through the Dio catalog right to the end. My favorite song on this album is The King of Rock and Roll, like you, Pete. I think this is probably a cousin to We Rock. I love the illusion that he provides that it's kind of live, and Dio said It's not. They just provided some sound effects, but it's got that live in your face. So it's a rip snorter of an opening track. Continues the stellar record that Dio has with all of his records, that the first track is always an absolute cracker. Right. For me, my least favorite is Shoot Shoot. I think it's awkward. The lyrics are a little bit trite, and the delivery, it just doesn't kind of fit. It's not a memorable song for me, and it's a little bit of filler. And this is where the warning signs are coming in. There's a way too much filler in this album. I don't think Vivian, Pete, like when we were talking about Dream Evil in the show, I'm quickly going off tangent. You know how you said you can hear if a band's not happy and it seeps through the speakers? I can kind of feel that this band's not in synergy, and there's few little cracks that are starting to appear. And even like the Vivian Campbell lead breaks or the guitar lead breaks, they don't seem as engaged, or they bubble like the first two albums.
And it's hard to tell those kinds of things, fly on the wall, and you can only go by what things that will come out into the public. But you do get a sense because, all instrumentation, even guitars and drums and, non-vocals are emotionally based. They come from a soul. And you can kind of tell that when someone is maybe not really into it. And you say, well, that's crazy. What are you, some kind of fortune teller or something? But, you kind of can. That the album itself kind of has a little malaise over it. And whether it's compositionally, and that could be a factor, what they contributed, how they wrote, what they decided to write, what they didn't write. All of that can be just as important as what they played and what they didn't play. And all of that will contribute to how the overall album feels. So, I mean, if you can say, are there cracks starting? I mean, we could say, yeah, but we're not sure how deep they are or how big they are or to what effect it's going to have moving forward. You would never know any of that listening to it.
Yeah. But to me, when, I bought the album and I bought it in the day, I was a bit disappointed because it just didn't kind of bubble and crack like Last in Line. There was something a little bit sluggish, and there was something that just didn't seem quite right with me. But there are some great songs on the album, but there's a lot more filler than I would have liked.
I also think the album covers a big step down from the first two, which are brilliant.
That the dragon, he's holding the little.
Yeah, that didn't work so
Art
well.
Jim, yeah.
Great stage show though. I've still got somewhere. I had the. I saw the tour with Craig Goldie.
So did I.
Unfortunately, I didn't see Vivian, but the tour program had all the shots of Vivian just to rub it in, and it looks
in the closet.
It looked spectacular, Pete. With the dragon, because when it came to Australia, we with economics, he had to leave the dragon behind, so it was a very stripped back. But you guys, it looked like a spectacular show.
Yeah, I got it at Alpine Valley, Wisconsin, which is a massive outdoor place with no restrictions because all there is cornfields and cows. And they blew the place up like the 4th of July. It was stunning. It was great.
Reed, did you see Sacred Heart?
I sadly did not. Dream Evil was the first concert I was able to catch of Dio.
Oh, very cool.
Very cool. Good segue. Let's talk about Dream Evil. 1986. So we've got a change of personnel. Vivian Campbell, gone. Craig Goldie in. So, Reed, favorite, least favorite?
They put out the really tragic semi-live EP intermission with one new song to introduce Craig Goldie. It's not even a very good song. It did not make me think that great things were coming, right? So I didn't know what to expect when Dream Evil hit. And thank goodness Dream Evil is a good album. And for years and years, the sound, especially the guitar sound of Dream Evil, bothered me. And I can no longer remember why that is, because this time I was listening to it and I went, what is it I didn't like about this? I think it actually sounds pretty good. It used to be kind of abrasive, like there's too much high end, it's a little scratchy.
Crackly.
Yeah. But I guess maybe as I get older, as people age, your ability to hear high end kind of reduces a bit. So maybe it's a literal physical change. I don't know. But I thought the songwriting was very strong. Now, at the time, the irony is, to me, Rainbow was Joe Lynn Turner era Rainbow. So I did not realize that Dream Evil is the most Rainbow-esque of all Dio albums. And that's because of Craig Goldie. Craig Goldie is a massive Rainbow fan. He worships Ritchie Blackmore. And I think, although I have not read this particular thing in interviews, I think Craig is responsible for raising the level of keyboards. On the previous albums, the keyboards are little stabs, maybe a little riff, but it's usually just a little sound effect or something. On Dream Evil, it is a bed underneath everything. If you have a real good sound source, you can hear that the keyboards are playing constantly through this album, which is a massive change for Dio. And I have to think that's because Craig was rainbowifying the band. So my favorite track, again, the title track. I love Dream Evil. Now, I think Dream Evil is Craig's attempt to write Man on the Silver Mountain.
Good analogy.
So if you listen to the riff, go back and listen to Man on the Silver Mountain, listen to Dream Evil. There are a lot of similarities, but that doesn't make it a bad song. And Dio wouldn't let him go all the way back into complete, rainbow worship. It's still a very modern album. It's very aggressive. And he brings a much more, or I should say, Craig brings a much more standardized heavy metal soloing technique than Vivian did. Viv was a very unusual player. Craig's an astounding guitarist. He's still an astounding guitarist, but he was not as unique as Vivian was. So whether that's good or bad, just up to the listener. But I saw Dio live at least 3 times on different tours, because I saw this tour and then I saw Magica and I saw Master of the Moon. So I think I saw Craig live 3 times, and he was amazing each and every time. He was just a killer player. And I love the lyrics. A friend of mine used to make fun of me because I love the part where he goes, Dream Evil, and it comes in with like the demon voice. And it's, right. I don't know, you could say it's a little cheesy. I think it enhances the mood. It's a killer album. It was a fun concert. Savatage and Megadeth opened. I mean, that's just a fantastic heavy metal package right there. On the other hand, my least favorite has always been When a Woman Cries. And kind of like the reason I dislike Invisible, I hate the vocal that goes, ah. And then I don't like the tinkling piano. I'm like, oh, no, no. It takes all of the things that are marginal on this album and cranks them up to be the main parts of the song. And it misses for me. Don't care for it.
Excellent.
Thank you. Pete, retort maybe?
Well, you and I have we talked about this extensively. I will just get directly to the point on my favorite here, Faces in the Window. It's always been Faces in the Window. Another great up-tempo driving, unrelenting burner. There's so much propulsion. Craig is really shining on this. The choruses are killer. The keys are used perfectly here. They add just the right texture, the right backing flavor. It's a great solo. I love the breakdown. And then those big, huge band punches, and then it's just all power from there to the end. We had talked about, when we did it, Pete, there's like, why is this way down here at track 8? That's something for, 2 through 5 or something early up in the album. But, once you get to it, it's really rewarding. But, this is just a crazy good track, and I've always just loved it. And I also made it no secret that When a Woman Cries is by far my least favorite. I just absolutely don't like it. I don't like the sound. I don't like the feel of it. I don't like almost everything. Ronnie's voice is great. Ronnie could sing the worst melody in the worst groove of the worst tempo, a worst written song, and it would still sound great because it's Ronnie, but it doesn't mean I'd listen to it again. I just, and I'd mentioned, Pete, on our show, I still get this when the verses start, I still get this Eminence front thing going through my head from The Who, and I can't get that out of there. The cracks the earth, and I'm like, no, no. So Faces in the Window is my favorite, and When a Woman Cries is my least favorite.
Yeah, and just a quick plug, Pete and I did a fantastic show on Dream Evil, Is This a Dark Horse album? And we do a very deep dive analysis of all the tracks, so check that out on Rock Daydream Nation. It's worth watching. I Could Have Been a Dreamer. I love that song. I think it's my favorite because it's emotional. I think it's Ronnie wearing his heart on the sleeve, and I hear this song and I get sad because it brings out a lot of emotions. I think Ronnie was going through a bit of a rough time. His wife had left him. His guitarist had gone. And the world was a different place in 1986. You could see the sands of, what was happening in the music industry. It was definitely changing, and maybe things were kind of slipping. And I just feel a lot of melancholy, and the way he sings, you can really feel his emotion. There's a lot of melancholy, there's a lot of sadness, and I love it when Ronnie speaks his heart. And I just think by this song, he's really intimate and communicating with his audience. So I think that's the best song on the album for me. I've actually changed my least favourite, and I'd have to blame you, Pete Jones. Sunset Superman. Because what's ringing in my ears is Pete did a read little word count in our show, and he counted, I think it was like 40 times. It wasn't as much as that, but multiple times that Ronnie repeats the chorus Sunset Superman. And
it's excessive.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is just a very basic fist pumping in the air anthemic type of song, and I think it was written for the audience that it can be a call and response. Let's have a competition. Who's singing louder in the left side of the audience? Who's in the right? Doing that sort of or as a song. I think maybe too much, bit simplistic in the chorus. So. Sunset Superman is probably my currently my least favorite, and I have changed my opinion. All right, so the next album is Lock Up the Wolves, and I'll be honest, this is probably the time that I went off Dio for a long time. So I probably checked out after Dream Evil. I love Dream Evil, but it's just that personally I got into other music. And I sort of left the Dio camp for a long time. So it's going to be interesting from here to the end of the catalogue, because although I'd sort of reacquainted myself and had listened to a lot of these songs in the day, part of this exercise was kind of relearning and re-listening to it. So for me, this is a very interesting exercise right to the end of the catalogue. Reed and Pete, you're probably much more intimate with it, so I'm interested to hear your views. Lock Up the Wolves. I had the guitarist Rowan Robertson on guitar, Jen Johansson on keyboards, Teddy Cook on bass, and Simon Wright on drums. Simon Wright, ex of AC/DC. Reed, what is your favourite and least favourite song off Lock Up the Wolves?
Okay, poor Lock Up the Wolves. I used to call this the Lost Dio album. I got it the year it came out. I didn't get it the day it came out, but I got it sometime during that first year, and it was already in the delete bin at the local.
1990, I believe. I didn't say that. 1990. Yes.
Yeah, it was 1990. And it's amazing how out of step the album is with other heavy music in 1990. There was no way that Dio was going to sell a lot of albums in 1990, period. But then he turned in this album, and even though there actually are some great moments on this album, I hated it for a long time. But as I've said, time heals all wounds, right? I've lived with this album for 34 years now. And I have found the moments in it that I enjoy. And actually, most of those come from Rowan. Rowan, he was 18 years old when they did this album, and he was already a killer guitar player. There are some really creative lines, especially in his solos, but he was not yet a great songwriter. And I don't blame him for that. He was 18 freaking years old. But I give Ronnie all the credit for hiring a young guy and then insisting that he write songs with his new young guitar player, but he just didn't have the chops. The playing chops he clearly had, but he didn't have the songwriting chops. I wish they had done a second album. I bet it would have been light years better. Now, that having been, one of the things that I always remember about this album, I remember Ronnie doing interviews where he's like, heavy metal's in a slump. It's happening to everybody. We're not going to try and sell out arenas. I'm going to play 5,000 seat theaters and sell 5,000 tickets. And I thought, oh man, there's no way Ronnie's selling 5,000 tickets to anything in 1990. And this tour was not particularly successful. But again, there are some songs on it that I really, really love. And my favorite is going to be Walk on Water. It's one of the up-tempo songs. It's got a good riff to it. By the way, if you look at the songwriting credits, they are notable in that there are songwriting credits for band members who became ex-band members during the recording of this album. So, Jimmy Bain is gone before the album is recorded. Vinny Appice is gone before the album is recorded, and yet they still co-wrote songs on the album because they left during the recording process. It was apparently, financial stress, or I should say, bad financial times are always stress, and I'm sure that not everybody was doing well, but they still turned in some really good songs. I think Walk on Water is a great track. It's got a great riff. It swings. Rowan had the ability to swing. He, unlike, Craig worshiping Richie Blackmore or Vivian for Gary Moore, Rowan was a disciple of Jimi Hendrix. And he brings a swing to his guitar parts that just weren't there in the previous guitarist. So he really sets himself apart. And I really appreciate that. Also, amazing solo. Again, at 18, I'm floored by how good a soloist he was at 18. And he's still a really nice guy. I subscribe to his YouTube channel. It doesn't get very many views on any of his videos, which I think is sad. But he just seems like he'd be a fun guy to sit down and talk with. My least favorite, and it kills me to have to say this, but for the first time, my least favorite is the title track. It's the epic track. Lock Up the Wolves is not a good song. And I remember when they made the switch from Vinny Appice to Simon Wright, one of the things that Dio said is Vinny constantly overplayed. He was always filling up the space. And as soon as we got in Simon, suddenly those spaces were there. And I was able to fill that up with, vocals, or Rowan could play guitar. And I thought, even if you accept that premise, there is actual dead air in this song. Silence. That's not space. It's dead air. It's completely inappropriate. It kills any momentum that the song might have. It goes on way too long. It's just, I've never liked it. If they took it off of the album and replaced it with almost anything else, I think it would have been a better album. So just that one. I mean, there are some other weak tracks, but that one is easily my least favorite.
Okay, Reed. Pete, what did you think of this album, and favorite and least favorite song?
Wow, lots to unpack here. And I will thank my Reed friend for giving me lots of extra ammunition and things to go after here. It's a very interesting record. First of all, I think it's recorded very, very well. Everything sounds big and clean. And so from that, it's a nice upgrade from especially from Sacred Heart and some of the more questionable things on Dream Evil. but he said a couple things that I'll hit on first, and then I'll grab my picks. There's an inherent conflict in the band. Rowan does swing. His playing flows beautifully. He leads and tends more towards a triplet feel than more to an eighth note or a 16th note feel. But Simon Wright doesn't swing on a hangman's noose. Sorry, he just doesn't. He plays straight up and down. That's what works for AC/DC. Not that Phil Rudd doesn't swing, because he does. But Simon has always been a disappointment to me for that one factor. It's just square. It's boxy. So their inherent conflict with two instruments in the same band, one swings and the other one doesn't. And unfortunately, the drummer controls feel way more than the guitarist does. So a lot of times this stuff just kind of sits and goes along a line instead of flowy like it did with Vinny. You know, Ronnie, I didn't buy the premise because I've talked to Vinny twice. I met him twice. And people have asked him, you know, what about the playing over the bar line? He goes, Ronnie loved it. He said, you do your fills. I don't care. He's never told them to stop doing it. So he's just like, go for it. But you're right. Normally that is filled up by drum fills or something else. And now there is open space. Now, open space can be very, very effective depending on how it's orchestrated and how it's used. I did see this tour. I saw it in a small theater in Denver, Colorado. I don't know what the capacity is or how full it was because we were way up front and I never bothered to turn around to see how many fellow cohorts there were behind me, but it was loud and it seemed very full. The fun element is that the singer in my band was with us and his wife, and she was about 8.5 months pregnant. And everybody was thoroughly convinced that Too Much Ronnie was going to all of a sudden spout a Born Again album cover, baby, right in the middle of the auditorium. And they're like, are you sure you're okay? And she was just about to pop, but she was, you know, way up there and having a great time.
Pete with the towels, ready to be the, you know.
we were ready to move out of the way quickly, and we're like, and she didn't care. We're like, it's gonna come out with red eyes and everything, and she's like, I don't care, you know. So it was an interesting show. Ronnie had changed a lot of stuff. We saw it in a smaller theater, not a lot of pyro. There was no fire, anything like that. And he came out in jeans. I'd never seen Ronnie come out in jeans. So visually, it looked different. Everything was kind of different. When we get to the album, there are some good moments in it, and some more challenging. Teddy Cook is a competent bass player. He's not horrible. He's not great. He's just there. Ian Johansson is like hiring Keith Emerson to play the Go-Go's. I mean, it's just so overkill. He's so technically advanced. For him just to, you know, do the Rainbow in the Dark lick or anything was almost insulting. You know, the time he'd shined is during his solo, but, you know, most guys were leaving to go do their business until he was done and nobody cared what he was playing anyways. My favorite track on this has changed quite a bit. I remember when I saw the video to Wild One, I thought, this is a good aggressive track, but I've always thought in my head, what would that sound like if Vinny was playing? I'm like, that would be a different track. But the one, long answer here, the one that does work with Simon's playing, for me, is the title track, Lock Up the Wolves. Because it is more straight and rigid in how it's orchestrated and how it's written and how it's composed. And I love that each verse slowly adds a new element. The guitar gets a little more busy. You get a little background keyboard. It just kind of builds up, and it's all a showcase for Ronnie's enormous vocals on this. And it really changed my opinion when I heard it live, because when you hear those punches through a full PA system right into your chest with all that silence afterwards, it's got some force to it, and it really makes a strong impact both emotionally and physically. I think Rowan's solo on it was outstanding, and I love this lyric. There's no back door to heaven, just a front door to hell. And I'm like, yeah, let's let that fester for a while, So I thought it's a great track, and it's the one I kind of go to and get excited about when the album comes out. My least favorite is Between Two Hearts. Um, it's a nice kind of quiet, gentle vocal with Dio. But then it just kind of derails for me. It goes too long, and it's just not a song I enjoyed. So Lock Up the Wolves and Between Two Hearts for Lock Up the Wolves.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks for that anecdote from the concert. That's in my brain at the moment. That's a classic.
And the baby came out happy and healthy and did not have red eyes.
All right, thank you. Lock Up the Wolves. I find a lot of this is a bit one-dimensional. I don't think the palette is as broad, and I think Ronnie needs a very strong foil in respect of his musicians and, from a songwriting point of view, and maybe that was a little bit lacking. I find it quite interesting because from here to the end of the catalogue, he's got this kind of pool of musicians that have had different combinations. You could play a game and just throw different combinations from each album, and it's sort of like he's just been taking musicians out of the pool from here to right to the end. The song I'm going to pick is Hey Angel, because to me this sounds like a little bit of an AC/DC song, and it does suit Simon Wright with that up and down, that 4 on the floor rhythm. I like the lyric. I like the melody. It's got a little bit of a riff to it. Yeah, that's probably my favorite song on the album. Night Music is my least favorite. It sounds like a bit of a recycled riff. There's a lot of riffs on this album where they sound a little bit recycled and sort of hark back to an earlier Dio album or maybe a Rainbow or a Black Sabbath. It doesn't have the cut through of the, classic Dio. And to me, I think it's a little bit of filler, and that's my least favorite Night Music. So then we get deeper into the 90s and we come up with the album Strange Highway. So we have a different change of lineup. We've got Tracy G on guitar, Jeff Pilson on bass, and Vinny Appice back behind on the stool on drums. So this is in 1993, and this was right in the heart of alternative and grunge music. Very different sounding album. Read Little. Favorite and least favorite?
So Pete J and I have had lengthy discussions about this album. We did a show, more or less, the two of us and Martin Popoff, that went about an hour talking about it over on the Contrarians. I will just say I understand that this album is a huge stumbling block for many Dio fans because it's so untraditional. Ronnie was trying desperately to stay relevant. He picked up, he brought Vinny back. Vinny brought this guy who had been playing guitar in World War III with him, Tracy G, and it simply sounds like nothing that Dio had done previously. And I get all of that. I get that, Tracy was very noisy and squealy. It opens the record, you go all the way back to Sacred Heart, and the King of Rock and Roll opens with drums. You go to Dream Evil and it opens with keyboard stabs, dan, 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 dan. And then you get to this one and it opens with squeal. And I was like, oh, holy crap. Ronnie has really turned up the distortion on this. But I love it. I think it sounds amazing. I think Tracy G was a very creative guitar player. Yeah, he didn't do a lot of like Randy Rhoads style fills, but I love those noises and dive bombs and squealy noises. It's just, I love it. And I love this album. It's probably my second favorite Dio album and has been since it first came out. I saw this concert. I took my wife to it. Well, at the time we were just dating, but she was like, well, what kind of music do you like? And I was like, Ronnie Dio is in town. We're going to go see Dio. So I took her to see Dio, and, we're still married, so it's all good. But my favorite track is one that exemplifies that all of for what some Dio fans are the worst characteristics on this album, but I love it, is Evolution. It's so noisy. It's so aggressive. And it has the closest thing that Dio ever came to groove metal. Now, this album came out after Vulgar Display of Power. So that was very much in the metal consciousness. And I love the way the lyric goes, the rhythm of it. I mean, Dio always sounded great, but he did not always have that motion to his vocal. He is really hitting that groove. I would have loved for him to do more of that. He kind of abandons that pretty quickly in this experiment. And let's face it, that was never going to work for most people. His traditional audience didn't like it, and the young audience didn't care that an old fart was doing their music because they had new bands like Tool and Pantera to listen to. They weren't going to buy Dio. But I have always loved that track. I love the singing on it. I love the noisy guitar. Everything that other people say makes this a bad album. I freaking love it. Now, as for my least favorite song, it is and always has been Give Her the Gun. There was a time, this time, as a matter of fact, around alternative in the early 90s, where bands that wanted to have a social consciousness did songs about child molesting and how bad Aerosmith did it, and Motorhead did it, and Dio did it. And it was like anybody that wanted to sound like they had a social conscience did songs about child molesting. And you know what? I got freaking sick of it. I agree. It's an evil thing. People should absolutely be able to say, this is a terrible, evil thing. We need to stamp it out of society. I just don't want to listen to a song about it. He even did it in concert and gave this long spiel before he started about how bad child molesters were. And I was like, dude, is anybody arguing that point? Why are you preaching to us about how bad this is? Anyway, it's not a bad song. I just, I was like, I am so over this subject matter. Do anything else.
Pete.
Well, to echo my friend, I don't just like this album. I absolutely, completely, full throttle love every second of it. And I always have. And it vacillates either between number 2 or number 3 with me. And I make no apologies for that whatsoever. There's so many great things that are going on here. This is an album that is a victim of circumstances, environment, timing, everything else, that people come at it with a closed mind or a pre-cognitive decision of what this is supposed to or is going to be or what it should be, instead of just putting it on and just saying, what is it? And is it doing what it wants to do well? And I say, yeah, it's doing it in spades. Ronnie's angry. He's mad. He's pissed off for a lot of reasons. This is not the happy rainbow in the dark demons, wizards things. This is in your face social consciousness. Start thinking, what the hell are we doing to each other and to the world? And pay attention, damn it. And I'm going to have you pay attention with the heaviest, thickest, most powerful rhythm guitarist that he's ever had. And he brings back his most powerful drummer he's ever had. And the tandem of them is just lethal. It's like fission or fusion, whichever one that happens to be, whatever makes things blow up. It's just mammoth. And oh my God, it's perfect. And from the opening track, my favorite, Jesus, Mary, and the Holy Ghost, this is just so in my wheelhouse. And everything about it is just stunning. He starts that opening riff and you get that na 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 right, and then it's just bam, and it's he gets that prime time nursery rhyme. Did you da, 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 bam? And the drumsticks sound like they're this big, and the drums are bigger than this room, and it's just and his rhythm playing and is so epic and heavy and chunky. And I could have picked any of the first 7 or 8 tracks because it just goes from strength to strength to strength. They're not similar, different feels, different tonalities, different grooves. And I'm like, oh my God. But the opener has always been the one, because the one that's just reaffirmed and refreshed my love for this. And I'm like, I knew it was still there. I knew you could get back to it. And maybe if it's my secret and Reed's secret and nobody else knows about it, okay, I'm perfectly happy with that, because I think it's just, amazing. And live, it was immense. And it's just so crushingly big. The least is not really a least favorite. This is one of the albums, Bring Down the Rain. I don't think it's a bad track. I just prefer everything else over it. So I don't have anything really negative to say about it. And I would say, if you're not really sure, first of all, listen to the record, but then go check out the live stuff on, what is it, Eagle Rock, who does all the DVDs. He's got the live show from London with this band. And if that doesn't blow you into another hemisphere, you're not paying attention, because Ronnie never, ever sounded better. And remember, he's coming right off of Dehumanizer. And, he ends his career at that time in Oakland in 92. And Ronnie was singing as good as he ever, ever sounded. And he just carried that aggressiveness and the anger all the way over into Strange Highways. And this has way more of a Sabbath kind of power and feel to it than certainly a Rainbow, and maybe even some of the earlier Dio stuff. So anyways, long-winded on that one, sorry, but Jesus, Mary, and the Holy Ghost, and Bring Down the Rain.
Never long-winded, Pete. Never long-winded. No, I really appreciate that. I think this has been critically reappraised, Pete. I'm reading a lot more. I think there's a bit of a groundswell of people thinking this is not such a bad album, because I know it got reviled in the day. Right. And I think Record Store Day, they did a remastering or representation of the album. So I think out of the catalogue, this is getting a lot of reappraisal. So after all this time, I, like you, think that Jesus, Mary, and the Holy Ghost is the best song on the album. It's adventurous, and a lot of classic rock artists in 1993 weren't as adventurous. So he was open-minded to incorporate different sounds, maybe contemporary or not, Let's face it, what was happening in 1993? There was a lot of grunge. You got Alice in Chains. Musical landscape was shifting, and he was embracing that. So that's a big tick. So you listen to this song, and it's got a lot to unpack. There's a lot of different things happening. You've got the processed voice. You've got sudden silence. You've got this really heavy, biting riff. Maybe not melodic, but it hits you between the eyes. And I think it's an outstanding opening track. This is like, all right, if you're expecting me to do another Sacred Heart or What Happened, this is completely different. This is a new Ronnie Dio, 1993. Now, my quibbles with the album is the drums are mixed too high. Too loud.
Shame on you.
Yeah, no, it's too in the mix, I think. Could be pushed back a little bit. So Blood from a Stone is the example. It's my least favorite song, and I wrote down it's a grunge rock mix. It's a mix that was very similar to a lot of what grunge albums were sounding, and I just think you hear the cymbals and they jar. So it's a little bit unpleasant. For this particular song, I think Dio's vocal lines are a little bit uncomfortable. sometimes Dio, his vocal lines need a really tasty riff that he can sing and latch onto. I think on this particular song, it's a little bit uncomfortable. He's a little bit out of sync with the melody or the riff. But that's, I give it a tick. He's trying something different on this album. I'm not going to be a negative person and just say, oh, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. He was trying something different. And with Jesus, Mary, and the Holy Ghost, folks, listen to this. This is a classic rock artist. And how old would he have been there around that 1993? Well into his life, 50s or something?
Dates.
Trying something different and contemporary. So it's a big
mid to late 40s, I think. When was he born? 46? Something like that?
Yeah, I should know, but I can't. I'm not good with dates.
But anyway, advanced, classic rock artist trying something different, big tick.
And he sounds as good as ever.
Yep. So Jesus and the Mary and the Holy Ghost is the best, and Blood from a Stone, least favorite. So we had the band back again in 1996 for Angry Machines. So Reed, least favorite song on this album?
Okay. And before we move on, I wanted to say there's something about Blood from a Stone. I love the part at the end where he says, and I know it's a shock to find you can't get blood from a rock. I love that part. Anyway, so Angry Machines. The biggest drop off in Dio history for me. I was riding so high on Strange Highways. I was actually away from home from several months on working on a detail in a remote location. Drove to the mall and I was like, hey, new Dio album. Man, after Strange Highways, this is going to be awesome. And it was not awesome. And this is pretty easily my least favorite Dio album, which after the high of Strange Highways, I just was not expecting. I think that Dio was not expecting the hatred from his community that Strange Highways got. Tracy G got so much abuse back in the day. I mean, it was very sad. And there are a lot of songs on this album that I just don't think particularly work. But if you get the live album, what was that?
Inferno?
Inferno, yes.
Yeah.
It's great. This material, like Double Monday, sounds great live. But the album, it just doesn't do it. It's no longer just like angry and we're out to prove something. It's just resigned and pissed off, and it's for the first time ever I feel like Dio really kind of phoned in some stuff, but there is still some stuff that I like. My favorite track has always been Institutional Man. Here's a song that has space on it. It's very weird. I think it's kind of very loosely conceptually, I relate it to 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. But admittedly, you've got to kind of dig to get that. It does not have a great opening riff, but it's very hard to describe sound. It's a very dissonant sound. The guitar is doing one line, and Ronnie is singing a completely different set of notes over it, and they actually rub against each other, and it's very strange. And I like that effect just for this one song. If he had done that more, it would really have gotten irritating very, very fast. But I like Institutional Man. I've always liked that song. Unfortunately, the song that I dislike the most is, I think, maybe the least Dio song Dio ever recorded, and that's Stay Out of My Mind. The song that's solely credited to Jeff Pilson. And I know there's a story in Martin's book about Dio. He talks to Jeff, and I love Jeff Pilson. I love Jeff's work with Dokken. I love the 3 separate projects he's done with George Lynch separate from Dokken. I love them all. Jeff's solo work, I love. I don't know who he wrote this song for, because he had this song already, and apparently they were having such trouble coming up with songs in the studio that Dio was like, "Oh, we just need songs to finish this." And Jeff was like, "Well, here, I've got this." And he said, "Great, good enough. Slap it together and put it on the album." And I think it just doesn't fit. And like I said, I don't know who Jeff was writing for. He didn't write it for Dio, but it doesn't fit any other project he's ever done. I have a hard time imagining him sing it. Jeff is a great singer, by the way. He sings on his solo stuff. He sings on some of the stuff with like Lynch Pilson. I think he's got a great voice. But I have a hard time imagining that he would make this sound good either. It's just not a good song. And yeah, I understand why they put it on the album, because they needed filler, but it just has missed with me from the very first listen.
All right. Pete.
Yeah, this is a challenging album. You know, you get the sense that with Strange Highways, they were angry with a purpose. Here they seem angry and lost. And, you know, they're not the same thing. You know, this really meanders. And, you know, there's also different levels to dark. There's some dark stuff in this. And, you know, that is very close to the just a little bit too much. And you're like you said, who is this aimed at? And I think we noticed too, starting with Lock Up the Wolves, that the albums are getting further and further apart time-wise. You know, that is also becoming a factor. You know, it's not the punch it out every 12, 13 months like they were doing from 83 to 87. And there's only a break in 86 because they were touring like crazy. You know, because Sacred Heart had a full 2 legs, you know, all over the map. But now there's 3 years plus starting between these, and you know, things dry up and moods change, and we know for a fact that the music between 1993 and 96 changed dramatically. That 90s era, it was whatever he did in 93 with Strange Highways, that was totally different in 96. And so it's like, where do we fit in? And if they believed, or we're getting this constant berating of, no, you're out of touch, Dio has lost it, what's going on, Tracy's the wrong guy, blah, blah, blah. It's got to start playing with your psyche, going, okay, what are we going to write? How are we going to write? What are we going to do? A lot of times a band, let's say like Rush, we get to, you know, 2112, they just close off all the doors and say, screw it, we're going to be us. And they come out with this. And I think maybe this be completely the opposite, way overthinking, way too much trying to hit the bullseye. So there's some things wrong with this. The track that I go to first, and we can talk about dark, is Golden Rules. This is a twisted song. And I'll admit, I like it because it's really twisted. You start with the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Little Children's theme. And then all of a sudden, it's just, you know, Ronnie's, you know, very dissident, and it's just like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes into this huge chugging riff and these massive drums, and it's just full of unbelievable power and energy. And they go back to the halftime bridge writing theme, which kind of became a staple for a while. It's just a big wall of sound, and it's just nasty, dirty. It ushers in a great, great solo, but it's just dark and gloriously kind of brutal. And then you get to the very end. Hush now, children, don't you cry. We've just killed tomorrow. How sad you are that your world has gone too far. Okay, that's dark. There's no optimism. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no rainbow at all. Hell, there isn't even any rain. You're probably in a drought. It's just nasty dark. And it's just like, wow, okay. But musically, and I think it just really drives, and it stands out over some of the other tracks that really struggle. For me, the least favorite is "This Is Your Life," not because it's a bad track. It's just not heavy enough. It can be done well, but not really resonate. That's really kind of where that was with that. But I do want to give a quick shout out, and Pete, we talked about it when we were doing deep cuts with Ronnie during the session. They came out on the Japanese bonus tracks of God Hates Heavy Metal. And I think it is a travesty that that was not included on the album versions outside of Japan, because that might, on certain days, edge out as my favorite from this era. And that is a lyric that everybody should read, because it's a thought bubble. And he's really preaching to the hypocrisies and the double standards of religion and judgment and everything else with a thunderous riff, and great song. So check that one out as well. But Golden Rules and This Is Your Life.
Thanks, Pete. Well, I think at this point in Dio, I think they're at their lowest point. They were probably struggling with the alternative music, what music was at that particular time. I don't think that the previous album had resonated like he would have hoped, and it sounds like a band has run out of ideas. I'll be bold and just say it's not a very good album, and it was a real struggle to revisit this and go through it. A lot of it sounds like the Metallica, the 90s, which I don't like, the slower down songs. There seems to be a lack of imagination in the melodies. A lot of it is very one-dimensional, and the lyrics are very angry. And Ronnie is a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, even though he uses a lot of creative metaphors, but you can see that he's in a very dark place. So it's not an easy listen. But out of the songs that I have chosen to be the most favorite, I've put Dying in America. It's got an interesting lyric, contemporary social political lyrics. It's got interesting rhythm. There's some also interesting chord progressions. The band are tight. It does sound in the pocket, and it sounds live. And you've got a very expressive, engaging Dio vocal line. But I counterpoint that with the song Black, where it's not very melodic, and Ronnie is singing a vocal line that feels like you're being bludgeoned over the head with a baseball bat. And that's not easy for the listener. So the vocal seems very disconnected from the band. Somebody described it as sounding like Living Colour meets Alice in Chains, which I thought quite interesting, because it does go off in that little sort of jazzy, but very un-Dio-esque sort of sonic landscape. So a bit of a contrast. Dying in America, an engaging vocal. Black, where it's like black, and it just feels like you're being bludgeoned. Sorry, folks, but this was a very unpleasant listening experience. It's not my Dio. Everyone's got their Dio, but it's not my Dio. But, with the catalogue, it does get better. All right. Magica, Reed, year 2000, a bit of concept album. Now, every artist seems to have a bit of concept album in them. And there were a lot of folks, classic heavy metal or classic artists, that were doing sort of concept-y albums. So I think we had one, Blackie Lawless, did the Crimson Idol. What do you think of Magica?
So this is an interesting album. Let me just say up front, I like Magica. I like it a lot. I've argued about this album with Martin Popoff on many occasions, because Martin really doesn't like it. He says it's too slow and plodding. I like it. If you look at the timing of it now, if you go back to Angry Machines, again, I think Ronnie had stuck with his previous sound too long, because by 96, you have to ignore what's happening in America. He was dying in America. That's why I wrote that song. But if you go to Europe, power metal is taking off. And who is the foundation of power metal? Like the proto power metal is Rainbow. And if Dio had embraced that back in 1996, given up on touring in the United States and just did what a lot of bands did, which is to start touring Eastern Europe and Europe almost exclusively, I think he would have had a much more successful album. But that also would have been kicking his previous band to the curb, and he was unwilling to do that. And I give him the credit for that, even if I didn't like the result. So with Magica, he's now almost moving back towards power metal, because when you start, by the time you're in the 2000s and you shot concept album, it's just got power metal written all over it. But he's still using previous guys. He brings in Craig. Tracy actually leaves because Dio asks him to do a 2-guitarist act with Craig and Tracy. And Tracy says, no, that's not me. So he just leaves. Craig comes back. Simon Wright is back.
Sorry.
Yeah. If Dio had brought in a double bass guy, I don't know who, anybody, brought in a double bass guy from Europe, maybe Mickey D. Mickey D would have kicked ass on this album. Brought in a double bass guy, picked up the tempo about 20 BPM per song, this would have been a fantastic power metal record. Instead, he goes to create a classic Dio record. And I actually think the worst thing about this album is the story. Dio is a lyricist. His long form story is terrible. It reads like something that you might have written in junior high or maybe early high school. I mean, I'm embarrassed listening to him read the Magica story on CD. It was not good. And he does the absolute worst sin ever committed on a Dio record, those stupid robot voices. So I love the start of the song. It comes in with a prelude, this real magisterial, like operatic song, instrumental. And I'm like, oh yeah, this sounds great. This may be more of what I want after Angry Machines. I need a palate cleanser. And then that robot voice, please continue. And I'm like, oh, boy, that just deflates that. My copy of this, I've actually gone through and deleted all of the robot voices I can. There are still some that are on the front of songs, and I'm not, so anal about it that I'll go in and actually edit the songs out. But if he had left all of that stuff out, it would have improved the album 100%. And as is, still, there are some good songs on it. They would have been better if they were a little faster, yes. But now I thought it was really interesting, Peter, that you mentioned AC/DC earlier, because to me, this is the album where bringing that AC/DC-like aspect into Dio really takes hold. Because now he's got AC/DC riffs, not just AC/DC drumming. My favorite song, though, actually, I love the opening fanfare. I love Lord of the Last Day. But then when he kicks into Fever Dreams, dun, 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 that is a fantastic song. And interestingly, it's written solely credited to Ronnie. So that's Ronnie's. Right. Well, you never know how they, somebody else might actually have come up with the riff and just not been credited, but that's probably not accurate. But I love that riff. There are a couple of others I love. Chalice, I love. I even like a song that I thought I was going to hate, but we'll get to that in a second. It doesn't hurt that it's a relatively short track, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. And even though it is still a little bit too tied into the story, and the story is a little too similar to Iron Maiden's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which is actually a better story. It's a great song. I think it would have fit in on Dream Evil. I think Craig Goldie solos his ass off on this album. I think Craig's solos are wonderful. They're bluesy. They're so much bluesier than they are back on Dream Evil, where he's just trying to be Richie Blackmore. So it's got a completely different feel to it. But I'm on board. Until my least favorite song is Ariel. And you guys know I've already said I love the Epic Dio tracks. But this song, everything that everybody says is wrong with this album coalesces into Ariel for me. It's too slow. It's too long. It's too uninspired, too tied into the vocal. If it was like a 3-minute song, fine. But it's not. It's over 7 minutes long, and I am just way over it by the time we get there. So those are my favorite and least favorite: Fever Dreams and Ariel.
Interesting. Thank you. Pete.
Yeah, it's an interesting record. And it's, sometimes there's just these, kind of right turns on a left turn only that you kind of just go, okay, I'll follow you. I'm not sure where this road's going, or if there's even a road at the end of it. I may fall off a cliff, but at least we'll all fall together. And you just kind of went on faith. That's where I was when it came out. I was like, all right, band's, Vinny's gone again. Here we're back to this again. I'm like, okay, all right. It's like you start going through it, and I agree. The whole robot thing, look, Janet Jackson made that work much better on Rhythm Nation using interludes between songs. They mastered it. This was not that.
Also, Prince did it on one of his albums, which I forget was all robot voices.
It can be very effective, but this was, it's like the worst video game voice ever that was outdated 20 years before you even heard it. It is slower. It is heavier. It does kind of plod along a little bit. I think subject matter being what it is, it'd be hard to be too up-tempo because they're kind of contrary to each other. It's not a very uplifting kind of theme, that would promote anything of mid or higher tempo, which brings me to my favorite, because it's the only one that kind of gets close, is Losing My Insanity. I think it's a great, beautiful riff. Craig starts the riff more acoustically. It goes to electric. They bring the extra in. The drums come in, of which the drums are enormously big on this. It's a very big sounding record. There's a lot of power, a lot of low end. And I think it's a riff that just works. It feels good. And Ronnie is doing one of his best vocals of the record on it, over the top of it. I love how it just feels. And when they do the round and round and round, and it just beautifully builds, and there's almost more space, like Last in Line solo section, like Holy Diver solo section, where they break it down into a rhythmic motifs underneath the solo, and then it kicks in with full time and everything under that. I thought that was more of a throwback to their earlier kind of style that worked on the earlier records. So that felt familiar and sounded good, and it was a good platform. And I agree, Craig is playing his ass off on this. He's now sounds like he's just being Craig, where at first maybe he was trying to maybe be somebody else to a point. I think it's an outstanding melody, and I love the way it ends. The violin and everything comes in, and it just kind of tails off. And, I just think that's awesome. So it's been my favorite since the record came out. My least favorite is actually Chalice. And the reason is, for me, and you guys know me, I'm not really a huge lyric guy until I hear them and I kind of go, ugh. These are cringy. These are just, you're like a tear in the ocean, dust in the wind, like a stone in the water. I'm gonna sleep with the devil's daughter. No, sorry.
That's a little unforgivable, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, I need to tell you just who you are, my description of the world I've seen so far. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam. I am. I mean, come on.
Well, he was
Dr. Seuss has already traversed this area decades and decades ago, Ronnie. You missed the boat.
he was a heavy pot smoker, so maybe too many bongs when he was writing.
They're cringy. And it really doesn't matter what the basic tracks are doing. It doesn't matter what the melody is or anything else that's going on. It's just bad.
Yeah.
So it's Losing My Insanity and Chalice, Marry the Devil's Daughter. So
Good stuff. I agree with everything. I'm going to put a shout out to it's wonderful seeing Jimmy Bain back in the band with his nice, tasty bass lines on the bottom end. Hooks in pretty well with Simon. Fever Dreams is my favorite. It's sharp, it's punchy. It does recycle a rainbow riff. It's very much Man of the Silver Mountain in that sort of wheelhouse. Dio's vocals are very engaging. And a tasty, confident Craig Goldie on guitar lead break. A lot of bravado. I think his playing is wonderful on this album. It's just so confident, and he just fits in the Dio world perfectly. So, thank God for Craig Goldie on this album. I kind of feel that this album, for all its flaws, feels like the ship is being straightened. It's on the right track, and we're getting back to that classic Dio, the Dio sound that everyone is familiar with. So it's like putting on a comfortable pair of shoes. My least favorite, well, I'm going to do maybe go off a little bit track here. I'm going to say the Magica story. That's my least favorite track.
Low-hanging fruit there, Peter.
Very low-hanging. I listened to it and I thought, oh. I tried to hang in. I got through it, but it was a bit of a chore.
It's great if you need a nap.
Yeah. But anyway, Magica story. Yeah, low-hanging fruit, Pete. Exactly. Killing the Dragon, 2002. Doug Aldridge is in the band. Got Jimmy Bain, Simon Wright, Ronnie James Dio. I'm going to come straight off the bat. Thank God. Reed, what do you think of this album?
I still remember when this album came out, you were starting to see legacy people talking about how much they loved Dio back in the day. So like, Tenacious D, Jack Black and his partner were talking about Dio. And there was an episode of South Park that has Dio playing the kids' school dance or something. Obviously it's a joke, but nonetheless, Dio was being reintroduced through pop culture that was not music. And I distinctly remember one of my coworkers saying, they were talking about Dio on South Park. When was the last time they put out an album? And I said, I've got his new album in my car, and it's freaking brilliant. It's brilliant. And they were like, oh.
It's like an episode of The Office, isn't it?
It's so if you look at the writing on the tracks, this is one that you can kind of read a story of some band turmoil, because some of the tracks are written with the previous band members, and then some of them are written with the new band members. So I don't know why Craig was out. Craig was in and out. We'll see him again soon. But Peter and I have talked before about Doug Aldridge. I love Doug Aldridge. Everyone go watch Peter's interview with Doug Aldridge. Doug Aldridge is a great guy. He's an astounding guitar player. He's not the world's most creative guitar player, and he's not playing things you've never heard before, but he just does what he does very, very well. He fit right in with Dio and Whitesnake. It's always surprised me that Dio and Whitesnake make use of the same guitar players. But Doug fit right into the band. He had all the chops and flash that he needed. Doug is a killer rhythm player. He's not as much of a riffer, but he's a killer rhythm player. So my favorite track, we are back to the title track being the best song. I love the song Killing the Dragon. It is simply a classic Dio song. It's got everything. It's got a great solo. It's got Ronnie sounds amazing. The sound on this album, it can't have had a lot of money behind it. But by now, technology was so good that you can make a less expensive album sound fantastic. And I think this is his best sounding album in 20 years. It just sounds great. And everything, if you like Last in Line era Dio, I don't know why you wouldn't love Killing the Dragon. It's a fantastic album. Now, that said, ever since the first day I got it, I have had it in for the song Rock and Roll. Now, and he did it in concert too. I saw Killing the Dragon twice because Ronnie opened for different concert tours. He was not a headliner by now. He's opening for people. I saw him open for Iron Maiden, and I can't remember what the other one was. But I saw him twice with Doug Aldrich. And he did this song twice. I mean, he did it live. And I kept going, why are you doing this song? It's the worst song on the album. If you don't know the story, this is a song about the terrorist attacks of September 11th and the effect that it had on rock radio in New York City, because they would no longer allow DJs to play songs like Holy Diver. They thought, Holy Diver might somehow traumatize people that just saw the Twin Towers come down. And I always tell, when people say, I don't understand Dio's lyrics, I'm like, well, that's because if you take the entirety of them, they can be a little muddy. But there's always a passage in it that says exactly what he means. And in this song, it's when the walls came down, we all sing warrior. You know, we all wanted revenge as soon as the Twin Towers came down.
Right.
But you could easily hear this song and not understand in any way that it was about September 11th. But it would still not be a good song. I don't like the lyric. I don't like the vocal on it. I don't like that incredibly slow. I mean, it fails on all counts for me. I think it's the weakest track on an otherwise stellar album.
Thanks, Reed. Pete.
Well, this is an important record on a lot of different levels for me. I left banking and started my run as a stay-home dad in 2000, and I already had the three kids, and the fourth one would be coming soon. And the boys. So now I'm home while they're there and home from school, or all the things that are going on, and I'm playing all this new stuff that I get, and they know I love Ronnie. I played Ronnie all the time. I put this record on, and literally, if I would put on the opening track, all they had to do is hear the synth or the keys come in, and they'd run from upstairs, and they'd run downstairs, killing the dragon. And I'm like, and they would kind of air guitar to it, and they would, kind of have fun with it. And, the other track that they did is, my third boy, who's, an inch taller than I am, was just a monstrous kind of chunky little kid. And his older brothers would kind of push him around. I said, you be careful. He's going to be bigger than both of you. And he is. But he would walk around the living room during the choruses, rock and roll, rock, and he just totally dug it. And I've got video of it without audio because I wouldn't be able to show it to anybody because of copyright. But it's just hilarious, and they loved it. And they would do the push thing, and they'd do push, and so my kids are all over this record. And what does that say? Well, there's some accessibility to it. It's easy to recognize. It's easy to digest. They're well crafted. They're well written. Doug's contribution can't be understated. However, it's very short-lived. And there's the downside to it. And the other thing that I ask in huge question marks is, where's Vinny? Because Simon does a much better job on this than he did on previous records. But I'm listening, and my favorite track is also the title track, Killing the Dragon. I'm envisioning in my head his King of Rock and Roll or We Rock or Stand Up and Shout drumming over the top of this. And I'm like, okay, top 5 Dio track. No, without even hesitating, because it would just been ridiculous. The whole album just would have had a whole different feel, but it's what it is. It's just a great, great song. Great vocals, great melody. The lyrics are great. The drums are huge. Everything about it works. And I will one up you. I saw him 3 times on this tour, and everyone was good. Every part of it was great. And all the material from this, just live and everything else they were doing. And Doug was great with the retro stuff, and everything sounded really, really good. And it really was kind of a big resurgence. And you're like, yeah, it's Ronnie. Ronnie's out there. And even though he may, in some cases, I saw him as a headliner at the House of Blues. And then I think I saw the Iron Maiden one and one other one where he opened as well. But those legacy bands along with him, they're like, hey, it's Ronnie. He's on our bill. We're better off because of it. And, they were. And they did their slot, and they were focused, and they were on fire, and they were powerful, and they sounded really great. So this really was a nice rejuvenation, and the album does sound absolutely spectacular. My least favorite is Cold Feet. To me, this sounds way more like an outtake from Sacred Heart era. I don't like the melody. It's not a really bad song. It's maybe a touch too commercial for me, and it certainly doesn't stand up to the more stellar tracks that appear ahead of it. And I'm thankful that if that's the placing and the sequencing that puts it last, that's okay, that it wasn't in the middle to kind of throw a cold glass of water on your otherwise very comfortable sunny day. It's good where it is, but that's my least favorite of that one. So.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks. Thank God for this album, because I think this really was a bit of a resurgence for the Dio band. Doug Aldridge is a solid songwriter, so he's a fine guitarist, but as a songwriter, he is a really good foil for Ronnie. I think this album sparkles, and it kind of brings me back. A lot of it there's a lot of Deep Purple and Rainbow. And my favorite song on this album is the single, which was Push. And Reed and I have had a bit of we were exchanging messages about this album. And this is kind of, I think, Reed, you described it as his most rock song. And,
it's his most successful effort to write, Mystery and Hungry for Heaven and Rainbow in the Dark. Push is better than pretty much all those tracks.
Yeah. I like the lyric. It's an empowerment lyric. It's aspirational. You've got to push. Get out of my way and push. You can turn the wheel, push, one more push. I just like the lyric. I love the cheeky video clip with Tenacious D. It's not too,
Yeah,
it's not mocking, but it's sort of like tongue in cheek. And Ronnie was back, and it's got a very tasty, catchy riff. And yeah, it's my favorite song on the album. But this album sparkles. It does. It really does. And it was a pleasure to listen to it as we're going in sequence. My least favorite is Guilty. Guilty, You Burn in Fire. It's not as instantly memorable. It comes down to the vocal line. There's a certain awkwardness. I think of some of Ronnie's notes, he's sliding, and to me, makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So yeah, just out of all the songs of this album, this is the one I gravitate to the least. But I think in my humble opinion, I think this is probably his best album since the 80s. But that's just my opinion. All right, guys, long journey. We come to the final Dio album. Master of the Moon, 2004. Craig Goldie, guitar, Jeff Pilson on bass, Simon Wright on the sticks again. And we had Scott Warren on keyboards. Reed Little, favorite, least favorite.
Scott had been their keyboard player for years. He had also played in Warrant. But, you know, and poor heavy metal keyboard players that used to have to stand off stage while people were playing, you know, or behind the curtain. I never understood that.
Poor Jim.
When I saw Dio the first time, they had Claude Schnell on keyboards, and he had a like a turret. They had a little castle stage set, and they had a turret, and Claude was up in the turret. And I thought, why did they have to get away from that and put the poor guy off stage? And can you imagine how humiliating that is? Maybe he was just glad to have a gig. But at least they finally officially acknowledge him, make him part of the band, put his name on the credits. He's in the band photos. That's a huge thing. Now, whether they also incorporate a lot of very strange keyboard things into this album. And I will always say this album has always made me kind of sad. I don't think it's a bad album, but it is night and day different than Killing the Dragon. Even though it's not a long period of time, Ronnie has deteriorated drastically. His voice doesn't sound the same. And the optimism is gone from his lyrics. This album seems tired and resigned. You know, how can I get through to you that wishes just come through in dreams? It's just it's an old man's album. He was only 62 when he recorded this, so he wasn't that old, but he sounds like a guy really in the last stages of life looking back with regret. And I wish, if that was going to be the case, I wish Killing the Dragon had been kind of the last Dio album. I'm also a huge fan of the Devil You Know, the album he did with Black Sabbath under the name Heaven and Hell. That also was a great album to go out on. This one, again, it just made me a little sad. And once again, we're back to the songs are a little bit too slow. They're a little bit plodding. They needed a little more energy, but Dio was not in an energetic place when they did this album. So my favorite, I almost went with The Eye, which is a song that I love for all the weird keyboard parts and the you know, he's got the synthesizer going, aye. I like that because it's so different, but I know that that's very un-Dio and probably, I don't know, it's just too atypical. So my favorite track is Living the Lie. I think it's a Sacred Heart level quality song. It's simplified Dio. It's you know, it's not peak Dio. It's not bad. It gets the job done, but it's not what I would have put on one of their better albums. Still, I think it has good lyrics. They're not maybe quite as hopeless as some of the other lyrics, although, again, it's not a positive message, Living the Lie. And I love Craig's guitar solo on it. I think Craig had become a very creative player over the years. He started off a fairly typical shredder and had become pretty creative. And I think it's got a good creative solo. My least favorite song, and it's always been my least favorite, and I hate that this is my least favorite for this reason, it's The End of the World. And it's my least favorite specifically for Ronnie's vocal. I just don't like his voice at any point in the song. And especially, it must be the end of the world. And it sounds like he's just not quite able to get, oh, this is funny. Zoom thinks I'm playing music and wants to know if I should change my music settings.
Right.
But yeah, he's not delivering the material with the power that he had been. And I said, he really sounds like he's aged 10 years since Killing the Dragon. And yeah, I said the album makes me a little sad.
Radio, Pete, final album. Favorite song, least favorite?
Yeah. It is kind of um, a anticlimactic end. Um, I was much, much more interested in The Devil You Know. And I found that to be a much, much, much stronger record. Um, for all the reasons that we could enumerate. But it's there's some elements in this that carry over some things from the previous records. Uh, pardon me. And, so my favorite on here has always been the track Shivers. And what I love about it is that it is simple, straightforward. It's a great riff, halftime choruses. The lyrics paint such a cool picture. Fingers scratching blackboards make cowards of the brave. A natural reaction from the cradle to the grave. Rats and bats and spiders and little things that crawl never make me tremble. I'm bothered not at all, but you get to the chorus and then I saw you and now it's like, oh, and you give me shivers. Oh crap. And it's like cemeteries, midnight, don't care, walking with the dead. As soon as I see you, I get shivers. And I'm like, that's freaking cool. It's simple. It's to the point. It's nothing to get misunderstood. I think it's a great riff. It's just dun 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 dun, and it just kind of drives along. And the solo section comes out of it nicely. And it just feels good. And it just seems, against all the other tracks, a little more positive, more uplifting. And I feel like, if that was the last Dio song I had heard from this era, I'm like, yeah, that's okay. Some of the other ones later on, no, maybe not so much. But that's always been my favorite. And I think that's a great, great track. And that would have been good on any album. My least favorite's the title track, Master of the Moon. For me, this sounds way too repetitious and redundant of things that have been on older albums. This, could have sat right in the middle of Magica, excuse me. It just doesn't go anywhere. There's nothing really original here. So this one just did not work. And the whole album as a whole is a kind of a challenging listen to go straight through. You kind of got to pick your poisons with this one. We never want to admit that, our heroes are getting older and that sounds change. And, look, for Ronnie to have anybody start to say there was some noticeable drop off this far in his career only tells you how ridiculously above everybody else he was to start with, that you're like, okay, a compromised Ronnie because of no other thing than he got old. Good grief. It's just another referendum of how absolutely one of a kind and how just once in a generation vocalist he was. So, it's a kind of a melancholy album. Did you always wish if there was just one more, and if it was the Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, that, the Devil, that's okay too. And that worked all right.
Absolutely. And considering Ronnie was a pretty heavy smoker, that he had fantastic vocal chops right to the end before Master of the Moon is something that, it's pretty hard to believe. But,
well, it belies all conventionality. It just doesn't make any sense.
It does. But maybe it comes back to him being that trumpet player. I always come to how he sings from the gut and down there, and maybe there was some sort of vocal technique that he learnt going back all those years as being a trumpet player. But I've got to say the album cover's terrible. I don't like this album cover. And I think it's all probably indicative of the record label. I found a lot of those 2000 classic rock albums that were on those boutique labels. You know, that label in Italy, what's it called? Frontiers.
Frontiers
Always,
SRL.
it's all something that Pete, you and I could do on the computer. It's just not belying. I like a bit of synergy, you know, because you look at that Last in Line album cover, and Dream Evil, which is a fantastic album cover, or Holy Diver. I remember having the album cover and poring over it while I'm listening to it, and you've got this little, it's just not very good at all. Death by Love is my favorite on this album. There's some interesting sonics. I think it's got a tasty melodic Craig Goldie line all the way through it. But one thing I like it is when it's just guitar and drums. No bass, it's taken out. Sonically, I find that interesting. Something a little bit out of the box. It's got a very engaging vocal line. I think this is a mighty fine track. So this is my favorite off this album. And I agree with you, Reed. End of the World is my least favorite. I think it's not a very catchy riff. And I think that Ronnie, it goes back to what I was saying in one of the other albums. He needs a tasty riff that he can latch onto for his vocal line. And if the riff is a little bit whiffy or not so good, it's a little bit out of sync. So there you have it. Well, gentlemen, I commend you. You've done some fantastic commentary. We have done the catalogue of Dio. An interesting journey for our viewers to see how this artist and the band progressed through different combination of musicians, through the songwriting, through the arrangements, through the performances, just the whole package. And one thing's for sure, that Ronnie is sorely missed, and he is definitely one of the titans of hard rock and heavy metal, or I'll just say it, rock and roll. Right. So Reed Little, wonderful to have you on the channel from the Contrarians. And Pete, this was your idea. So, mate, thank you very much. I think this is it was just a wonderful journey over the last couple of weeks to dig back into the catalogue and go through it. So I commend you for this suggestion. And it was just a wonderful thing to do. And I really appreciate your commentary on this on these wonderful albums.
Pleasure's mine.
Well done. So, folks, what are your favorite Dio songs, albums, best song, worst song? We really enjoy reading your comments. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. And, YouTube, just put in the name Reed Little or Pete Jones. Oodles of wonderful videos that these guys have done. And, there'll be more shows in Rock Daydream Nation exploring the Deep Purple catalogue, the Dio catalogue, classic rock catalogue. Please like and subscribe. It does help the channel. All right, gentlemen, wonderful to see you guys, and have a good night, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.